3, 2.
Welcome to the current events program sponsored by the Archbishop Michael J. Curley Assembly of the Fourth Degree Knights of Columbus. The Knights of Columbus have 4 principles: charity, unity, fraternity, and patriotism. Patriotism, or love of God and country, is the principle of the Fourth Degree. Our assembly produces and promotes these programs for the edification of its members and for the community. I have been selected as your host for this performance. By way of introduction, my name is Charlie Kenny. I'm a member of the Knights of Columbus for over 35 years. I'm a past Grand Knight of Prince George's Council, Knights of Columbus. I'm a past faithful navigator of the Archbishop Michael J. Curley Assembly, and I'm currently the Financial Secretary of the Prince George's Council. Our topic tonight is Behind the Large Door, and our guest for the evening is Paul Fisher, the author of that book. Now, Paul was born in March of 1921 in Indiana. He is the youngest of 8 children. He attended the parochial schools in Indiana. He subsequently graduated from Notre Dame University, did his graduate work at Georgetown and American University here in Washington, D.C. He was very active during the war, World War II that is. He was with the Office of Strategic Services, Army Intelligence during the Korean War. He spent 23 years in civilian intelligence and security work. For 8 years, he was a legislative and a personal aide to Congressman James Delaney, New York, who was the chairman of the Committee on Rules in the House of Representatives. He's been a Washington correspondent for the Triumph magazine, National Catholic Register, Twin Circle, and the Wanderer newspaper. He's a very well-known author, having written the book Behind the Large Door, Church, State, and Freemasonry in America, which he now followed up with a new book, Their God is the Devil. He married a Canadian gal in 1948. He's the parent of 9 children, 6 girls and 3 boys. He resides in Indiana. He's home here at the Christmas time to see his family live in the Washington area. Paul, you wrote 2 books on Masonry. One was Behind the Closed Door, Behind the Large Door, rather, and the other one is Their God is the Devil. Might want to say.
Yeah, this is the Behind the Large Door, and this is the Their God is the Devil.
Right. Now, why are you so interested in Freemasonry? Why did you write the book?
Well, I really knew nothing about Masonry. I had been interested, you mentioned the children I have, we had to educate those kids, and because the state requires that all children between the ages of 6 and 14 will be educated, we chose to educate our children in a Catholic educational environment.
Right.
And I thought, since the church mandates that they should be educated, it should give you some assistance in getting that education. But the fact is that they don't give you any assistance if you happen to attend a conventional religious school. I say conventional religion because one man's religion is another man's philosophy.
Right.
So secular humanism is rampant in parochial schools. And so I started researching the Constitution to see just why my kids couldn't, for example, get on a public school bus that passed by the parochial school our children attended. And I found rather quickly that the state of Maryland, which they resided at the time, had 2 decisions by the Maryland Court of Appeals, which is effectively the Supreme Court of Maryland,
right,
which in fact said that those children can get on a public school bus if that bus in its way to a public school passes
to another school,
near
right,
and by a Catholic school, they can get on. But the fact is that this was not implemented, and from that little background, I got interested in the religion clause of the First Amendment. And I became active with, I think, a group you had on here very recently, Citizens for Educational Freedom. Right. And through that study, I couldn't find anything which, under the Constitution and under court opinions up until 1947, would have barred these children from getting educated, or getting at least school transportation, but indeed getting educated. And I think the GI Bill of Rights of World War II is an outstanding example of what raised the problem in my mind, because under the GI Bill, returning veterans, soldiers, sailors, airmen, could attend even a seminary, any school that was a
That's
legitimate school.
That's for sure.
So I pursued that study of the aid to education, and that's how I really got involved with Congressman Delaney, Jim Delaney of New York, who was the chairman of the powerful House Committee on Rules. I was his legislative assistant and his press officer. And Jim Delaney had a voucher proposal. He knew Jack Kennedy, the President Kennedy, very well. They served in Congress together. And he used to tell me he'd chase Jack Kennedy around the Oval desk in his Oval Office trying to cut his hair, which was a little long at the time. And Kennedy said, "Jim, you're going to vote for my aid to education bill." And Delaney said, "No, I'm not, Jack." He said, "I can't vote to discriminate, for discrimination." He said, "Your bill counts all students in as far as the amount of funds that will be spent on education, but they count Catholic kids out when it comes to allocating those funds. And I won't vote for such discrimination." But so I had pretty well exhausted my studies. This was probably in 1965 of the religion clause and constitutionality. But in 1971, there was an article in the Washington Post about the papers of Justice Frankfurter. And in those papers, it mentioned that Justice Hugo Black, who handed down a key decision, the seminal decision on aid to education, which established the phrase, which became a rule of law, a wall of separation between church and state.
The phrase that's not in the Constitution, but everybody believes it is, right?
That's right.
Right.
And so he coined that phrase, which came from Thomas Jefferson, who was not a member of Congress when, well, never was a member of Congress. He certainly wasn't in Congress when they crafted the religion clause.
That's right.
So in the Post articles, it mentioned that Justice Black, they quoted Justice Brandeis in Frankfurter's paper saying that Justice Black hasn't an ounce of, it's not discrimination, I forget what it was, a term that he's biased. I said, well, maybe that's it. And that struck me because Black wrote the majority opinion in this famous Everson case and its wall of separation. So I went down to the manuscript division of the Library of Congress, and I asked to see Justice Frankfurter's papers. And they said, well, he just published a book. Would you like to see the book? I said, no, I'd like to see the papers on which the book is based. Right. So getting into Frankfurter's papers, I found mention of Masonry several times, and I found that other justices were Masons. And I said, maybe that has something to do with it. So I checked the record of the justices of the Supreme Court to see whether it was common for members to be Masons. And I found that for the first time in history, beginning in 1941 and extending through the period of 1971, 30 years, the court was dominated by Freemasons. And so I said, maybe that's it.
You think that was by design or by accident?
Well, you know, there was the stories back in the 30s about Franklin Roosevelt wanting to pack the court.
Right.
And some people say today, as have columnists, Leslie Gelb said it several months ago, that the court was never packed until the Republicans came in, and particularly Reagan and now Bush trying to pack the court. Right. Well, the so-called packing the court is really the battle for the soul of the American people, because the court decides what our moral standards will be. So going through those papers and finding that they're Masons and that they dominated the court for a long time, I said, well, so that. They dominated. What's Masonry? I didn't know about Masonry. I only knew that the Catholic Church opposed Masonry, largely because of its secret oaths, and you swear to uphold obligations which you don't know what those obligations are. They'll be revealed to you later. So I was reminded that when I first went up on Capitol Hill, the fun guys of Freemasonry, the Shriners, had a parade. And I was sitting there, we had 4 children at the time, and I said, gee, I don't care what the church says. These men are bringing a lot of happiness to all these kids, my kids, and all the people here. The place was packed, you know, all up in Washington.
Their charitable work too for the hospitals.
And their charity work for the hospitals. Right. And So that was my knowledge of Masonry, and I knew vaguely that they had a young group called De Molay for teenagers and so forth. So I said, well, I better find out what Masonry is if these men dominate the court. So I tried to find the document that the Masons keep in touch with the Brotherhood. And I found in Scottish Rite Masonry, and I picked Scottish Rite because most of the members of the court who were Masons were members of the Scottish Rite fraternity. And I found that book to be the New Age magazine. It's a monthly publication that goes back to the turn of the century. And I read it. It's about 100 pages long. It was up until post-World War II. I read every monthly magazine, 100 pages or more each month, page by page, because I'd been in the intelligence community, and I knew that most real intelligence comes from just gathering a lot of facts that are in the public domain and then putting together. And they call it the intelligence mosaic. And you can find out what the picture is when you get all these facts and arrange them properly.
Yes.
So I found that these men have been behind revolutions, from the French Revolution. I find that they boast about it. I find that in the New Age magazine they boast about being the successors to the ancient mysteries, the pagan ancient mysteries, which got into all sorts of obscenities and was completely pagan in its outlook. And I found that, that the Freemasonry in the United States is not much different than it had been in Europe. And the other book, which came later, Their God is the Devil, is really a listing of papal encyclicals which have condemned Masonry from 1738 virtually into the present day.
I thought not too long ago the Pope said he could join the Mason, the Catholic could join the Mason.
Well, that's a misperception, but it's partly the Church's fault for doing that. For years, the 1913 Code of Canon Law explicitly mentioned Freemasonry, that you cannot be a member of the Masonic fraternity or you'll be excommunicated. And in the Catholic Church, excommunication is a terrible sin which separates you from God, and it used to separate you from fellow Catholics, but they modified that social ostracization. And it was a sin that only the Pope himself could forgive. It's called a reserve sin. That was later turned down to the Vatican, and then later in 1962, I think Paul VI allowed it, bishops ordinaries to do it, and then that went to the confessor. So that attenuated it sometime. But the new law in 1983 expunged any reference to Masonry and any reference to overthrowing civil government. And so people became confused. And indeed, a number of bishops have spoken before Masonic groups. Cardinal of New York, Cardinal Cook, appeared before something like 2,500 Freemasons sometime in the 70s, the date exactly escapes me, at a breakfast, and he apologized to the fraternity for his fellow clergymen who had condemned Masonry over the years, and he wanted to make up for that. And of course those clergymen happen to be about 12 or 15 popes. And there's a total in this book here, Their God is the Devil, there's a total of something like 55 condemnations in Vatican documents, whether it's encyclicals or letters and so forth, with where Masonry is condemned either explicitly or implicitly, and explicitly 18 times.
Right. Well,
so that in when this change came, that change in canon law, everybody thought they could belong, and with Cardinal Cook and a number of other bishops and cardinals speaking at Masonic gatherings,
gave that impression.
Gave that impression, and a lot of men have gone.
Well, Paul, I think we have to take a break now for a short message.
Fine.
It is a pleasure to extend cordial greetings to the Knights of Columbus. Who is not aware of your outstanding history of charitable endeavors carried out in fruitful and fraternal collaboration? I wish to encourage you to remain steadfast in your love for Christ and in your many deserving efforts to defend and promote his saving message. continue to stand up for the dignity and value of all human life, especially that of the unborn, the elderly, and the handicapped. Persevere in your support for the Christian family and for institutions of Catholic education. May the Knights of Columbus always be known for their earnest and persevering prayer. This is my hope for you and your families and for all those who are dear to you. May God bless you all.
Okay.
Paul, during the break I was thinking of something you said earlier about the parochial schools having human secularism in them. Did you really mean...
Secular humanism?
Yes, did you mean that?
Oh, no. I meant the public schools, and everybody knows
Public schools. I thought
the
you
Catholic
didn't
Church
mean that.
teaches Catholic religion,
Right.
hopefully.
Right. Well, now, Paul, we were talking just before the break about the churches wavering there just a little bit maybe on whether a person could or could not become a Mason. Have the popes come out with any strong encyclicals or anything like that on Freemasonry?
Well, I think I touched on it. In the book there, God is the Devil, is a listing of something like, I forget the exact number, about 55 or 58 encyclicals and other documents
Right.
in which the papacy either directly or indirectly condemns Freemasonry and forbids Catholics to belong to it, and that if they recant, they're excommunicated if they belong. If they obviate the excommunication, the sin was forgiven only by the Pope himself. Later that became, under Paul VI, allowed the bishops to do it, and then ultimately the confessor. So this attenuating and taking it out of the canon law, the explicit mention of Freemasonry,
Right.
taking out the explicit mention of overthrowing or plotting against civil government, confused a lot of people, and then a lot of bishops, a number of bishops and priests and pastors allowed Catholics to belong to Freemasonry. I think it's clear that Freemasonry has penetrated the Vatican. It's a very insidious organization. And the average man, I don't know what I said this before, but I want to make it clear that there are plenty of real, decent, fine men who belong to Freemasonry. They think it's a fine organization. I myself, as I indicated, was very impressed with Freemasonry at the parade, and had the opportunity presented itself, I likely would have knocked on the lodge door, which is another thing about Masonry. Technically, you're supposed to knock on the lodge door and ask for admittance.
Right.
They don't get you. But that's the interesting thing about the parades that the Shriners have.
Shriners parades, right.
And that's clear in the book, and the book cites all the citations in the book, and almost every sentence has a citation backing up what I say. They're largely, 80% are from Masonic documents themselves, largely from the New Age magazine, the official organ, as they say, of Scottish Rite Masonry. They say that people in the early degrees, the first three called the blue degrees, are purposely misled. They think that they know what Masonry is about, but that's intended that they think that they know. But the real secrets, and it is secrets, are held only for the people in the upper levels. And I might say part of the insidiousness is it's documented. It's well known. They've been behind revolution since the French Revolution, the revolutions in Europe immediately following that. And there's I have in this last book, the second book, Their God is the Devil, a pretty strong case to ask that the government check in and see whether they were behind the assassination of Jack Kennedy, because they have a long history of being opposed to the Catholic Church. New Age magazine states that it was opposed to any Catholic holding public office. It went against Clare Boothe Luce. It was against the head of Justice Department, McGrath, under Truman. And it so happened that the civil rights law would not allow any government organization to bar blacks from equal access. President Kennedy signed an executive order in conformance with the Civil Rights Act, as he was required to do as president, the chief executive, and barred any military installation, for example, from barring blacks. Well, it so happened at Brooklyn Air Force Base, the enlisted Masonic organization met in the Enlisted Men's Club, and the executive order went down to the commanding officer, who said that they couldn't meet there anymore because the Masons discriminate against blacks. Blacks cannot belong to Freemasonry.
Right.
Consequently, Freemasonry has its own black organization called Prince Hall Masonry. So the upshot was that the New Age was publishing it as though Jack Kennedy, the President of the United States, discriminated against the Masons because they do not admit blacks.
Right.
Subsequently, you know, within days, that Enlisted Men's Club was burned to the ground.
Wow.
And this happened right before the assassination. And because the thrust of the editorializing the New Age was the President Kennedy, the Catholic president, was responsible for closing down that thing. And then when Kennedy died, they had a strong editorial saying what a fine man that the country lost. But immediately under that, on this very same page, it says that the Freemasonry is an action organization, and nobody can interfere with what Masonry wants to accomplish. So if you put two and two together, adding up their Aesopian language and how they operated through the years, it makes a fairly good case. So if you want to pursue that, I'd suggest you see their God is the devil.
Well, I would think everyone should take advantage of reading those two books of yours and all the research you put into it. In a moment or two now, I think we're going to take a break for another message.
Feel guilty? In our sad world, you would be foolish not to feel guilty. Come to the Loyola Retreat House on the Potomac with the Knights of Columbus Retreat. Repent and receive the forgiveness of the Lord. Come home happy and forgiven as you confess your sins and forgive others. Next year's retreat, scheduled for May 29th to the 31st. Come join us.
The camera with the light is the one that's on.
Paul, you seem to be very critical of the Supreme Court decisions involving Masonry and so forth. Could you explain that a little bit further?
Well, not specifically involving Masonry. I don't think there's been a case on it. I think there was a case of their grand philosopher, Albert Pike, came before the court, which is interesting because I went to look that case up, which was back at the late 1800s or the turn of the century, I forgot the exact date. And normally you go to the Supreme Court, or to the Library of Congress in the Law Department, and you can find the briefs. And the briefs are the arguments presented by the court, by the opposing lawyers.
That's right.
And in this case, that wasn't there. But no, it's largely because of their interpretation of the religion clause. The fact is that historically, up until this key decision in 1947, the Everson case, where they found there's a wall of separation. There should be no aid in any form or whatsoever to parochial schools. The fact is, in that case, the fine legal point was the court did approve the transportation of Catholic children, and it was Catholic children, it wasn't children attending religious schools, Catholic children in New Jersey to get to their school on by public transportation. But it was the dicta in there, which suddenly became enshrined as majority opinion in other cases.
Yeah.
But the fact is, from its inception, you read the debates in Congress on the First Amendment, when they first crafted the words, and we hear a lot about James Madison was the man who crafted the First Amendment. James Madison did not. James Madison proposed the 10 Amendments, he proposed the religion clause, but his proposals, the actual wording, was rejected by his colleagues in Congress. And they were either defeated or he withdrew the amendment. The real wording we have today was crafted by Fisher Ames of, I believe, Massachusetts, and a later Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, I think he's from New Hampshire, whose name escapes me, but he was in the Senate at the time. But at any rate, we gave aid immediately. Within weeks after the First Amendment was ratified by the states, we gave aid to Indians and to people who settled in the Northwest to propagate the Christian religion. The court 4 times has said this is a Christian nation. It's interesting, if you ever look at the decisions by the court, they never define what the word religion is. And the word religion, as defined by the court and in the turn of the century, no, the late 1800s, in the Reynolds case, was that religion is our duty we owe to our Creator and our manner of discharging it. That's what was interpreted as being the religion meant by the First Amendment. Accordingly, if there are people who don't believe in a Creator and have no duty toward Him, then the First Amendment does not apply to them. So the atheists and the agnostics and the people who shake their fists, there is no God, that doesn't apply to them. Furthermore, the court, the nation, the Congress, approved legislation repeatedly to aid teaching of religion in public schools and a general religion ambience into the country. You had, this was not at Supreme Court level, but you had laws against obscenity, you had Sabbath laws, divorce. The interesting thing is that divorce was so odious to the body politic that Ronald Reagan is the first divorced president we've ever had. He had laws against fornication and so on and on and on. Right. These were not put on there by Catholics, they were put on by a Protestant nation. But the Supreme Court, the key one was the GI Bill of Rights. And anybody who operated under that and knows that GIs could go to seminaries, they go to the school of their choice. And I read all the debates in the House and the Senate on that legislation. 85% of the members of Congress in the House and the Senate were lawyers. Not one of them, none of them even hinted that it was unconstitutional. None of them brought up the arguments which were advanced first in the Everson case about a wall of separation. And James Madison said it had nothing to do with it. Thomas Jefferson had nothing to do with crafting the First Amendment. The men who crafted it meant there would be no state, no national religion. And what we effectively have, because of these court opinions, and I wrote in the Columbia Magazine in 1986 an article, the Battle for America's Soul, and I ticked off the various decisions made by the Masonically dominated court, which made obscenity pretty much up to grab. They didn't know how to define it. There was a case, I think it was the Papage case, where there was a 4-letter foul word that the court found the man was wearing on the back of his jacket in a public building. I think it may have been a courthouse or city hall. And so the case came before the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said that's freedom of speech. But it's interesting that in writing their opinion, the court said the word, and they left a dash. They wouldn't even mention the word, but it's freely to speak.
It's freedom of speech.
And so they obviated obscenity laws, they obviated Sunday closing laws, prayer in school went out, and a key thing, I think everybody out in television land should realize that if you look at crime statistics gathered by the FBI over the years, that the crime has accelerated ever since we said there's no God, that we don't have to teach kids about a God, and we don't have to pray to a God in school. It's accelerated tremendously. And the cheapest thing, not to build more jails, not to throw more money at it, but simply let people send their kids to a school where they can hear about God and they won't be put in prison, that the 10 Commandments can be up on the wall and things like that.
Freedom of speech.
And so they obviated obscenity laws, they obviated Sunday closing laws, prayer in school went out, and a key thing, I think everybody out in television land should realize that if you look at crime statistics gathered by the FBI over the years, that the crime has accelerated ever since we said there's no God, that we don't have to teach kids about a God, and we don't have to pray to a God in school. It's accelerated tremendously. And the cheapest thing, not to build more jails, not to throw more money at it, but simply let people send their kids to a school where they can hear about God and they won't be put in prison, that the 10 Commandments can be up on the wall and things like that. So the court is absolutely wrong.
Very good. Paul, we want to thank you very, very much for being with us tonight. It's a very, very interesting subject, and obviously you know your business real well, and you brought us great insights into the field of masonry, and I hope everyone reads your 2 books on the Lodge Door and Their God is the Devil. And on behalf of Knights of Columbus, I'd like to thank you very much for being with us.